Hi, I'm James, and in today's Coach's Corner we're going to be talking about supersets, and we're going to cover everything from what supersets are, what makes a good superset, which exercises pair well together and which exercises don't pair well together. Okay, so what is a superset? A superset is when we pair two exercises together and perform the sets in an alternating fashion. So for example, if we paired up a bench press and a pull-up, we would do one set of bench press, then one set of pull-ups, then go back to the bench press, another set of bench press, another set of pull-ups, and perform the sets alternating until we'd finished all the sets. So why would we want to do this? Well, essentially, it allows us to get more work done in the same period of time. So it's a time-efficient way of training. We're going to focus today on supersets for different muscle groups. So there are different methods of supersetting, but we're going to focus on pairing exercises for different muscle groups rather than the same muscle group, which is what we would call a compound set, where you pair two exercises for the same muscle group. But again, that's not what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be focusing on supersets for different muscle groups. Okay, so what makes a good superset? So each exercise must not have a detrimental effect on the performance of the other exercise. And that's going to be our golden rule with supersets, is that one exercise can't have a negative impact on the other exercise, okay? That might sound straightforward, but it's very easy to make bad pairings, okay? To make exercise pairings that don't go well together. And we're going to keep on referring back to this golden rule that we have, that each exercise must not have a detrimental effect on the other one. Okay, so let's start off by looking at what makes a bad superset. Okay, so what combinations of exercises might not go well together. So, number one, when both exercises are overly grip intensive. So if both exercises are very demanding on grip strength, then they're obviously going to have a negative impact on each other. And the example that we've got here is a dumbbell split squat and a chin-up. So if you imagine we've got doing a dumbbell split squat, we're holding onto heavy dumbbells, we're going to say do 10 reps on one leg, 10 reps on the other leg, and then we've been holding onto those heavy dumbbells for 20 reps, and then we move on to the chin-up. Then our grip, our hands, our forearm are obviously going to be fatigued by the time we go into the sets of the chin-ups. Obviously that would have a negative impact on that exercise. So that would be an example of a bad superset. Okay, second one, axial loading. So axial loading is this term we use for this vertical loading of the spine. And when both exercises involve heavy axial loads, that makes a bad pairing because it's just fatiguing from being under that load for that long. So the example we got here is a barbell front squat. So we're supporting the bar across our shoulders, big vertical compressive forces on the spine. If we were to pair that one up with a barbell overhead press, we might think that those exercises go okay together because one is for a lower body exercise, one's for the shoulders and the triceps. But again, we're going to be under load with that axial vertical loading with the barbell overhead press, and it just gets fatiguing from being under load for too long. Okay, number three, fatigues the stabilizing muscles. So this is when one exercise fatigues the stabilizing muscles required for the other exercise. And the example that we've got here is a leg curl and a bent over row. So a leg curl is knee flexion exercise working the hamstrings. If we were to pair that one up with a bent over row, again on the face of it, that might look like a good pairing because one's a lower body exercise, one's an upper body exercise. But the problem is the leg curls are going to fatigue the hamstrings, and then the hamstrings are going to be required as a stabilizing muscle in the bent over row when they're going to be working isometrically to control the position at the hip. So that again would be a bad superset. Okay. So the stronger you are, the more important it is to sort of make sure that all your pairings are good pairings. Because weaker athletes or people who are newer to training might be able to have a bit more wiggle room in terms of their pairings of exercises. So you might be able to bend the rules a bit more. So if we take the example of our bad grip intensive superset, so if you are more of a novice level lifter, you might be able to pair up dumbbell split squats and a chin up or a band assisted chin up, because essentially the loads you're using might be a bit lighter. Okay, so if you imagine our dumbbell split squat, we're holding on to lighter dumbbells because the majority of the load is our own body weight. And then when we move on to chin-ups, we haven't been holding those same heavy load. And then the chin-ups, maybe we're not doing a lot of reps, maybe we're doing band assisted to help support you with your own body weight. So it's not as demanding on the grip strength, so we can kind of break those rules a bit more. Okay, so let's go on to some good supersets. So what we've got here is upper body push and upper body pull exercises. And these two groups of exercises pair really well together. So in the red column here, we have our upper body pushing exercises, and this yellow column is our upper body pulling exercises. And you can pretty much pair up any of these exercises in the red column with any of these exercises in the yellow column, because they kind of work opposing muscle groups. So the red exercises, the pushing exercises, they tend to work our pressing muscles, so the chest, the shoulders, the triceps. The horizontal pulling exercises work the upper back and the biceps. So they pair together really nicely. We've kind of broken these up into different categories. So we've got our horizontal pushing exercises, so everything pushing at this angle. So that would be our bench press, our dumbbell bench press, our dips. Vertical pushes, that's where we're pressing vertically overhead. So our overhead press, our shoulder press, our single arm presses. And then our isolation pushing exercises, they will be sort of isolation tricep exercises. So the examples we got here are some press downs and skull crushers. And what we find is, as I say, we can pair up any of these pushing exercises with any of the pulling exercises. Okay, so bench pull, so our horizontal pulling exercises where we're pulling at this angle. So bench pulls, seated rows, dumbbell rows, anything with a row in the name essentially. Our vertical pulls, so that would be our pull-ups, our chin-ups, our lat pull-downs, or our isolation pulls, so kind of our bicep isolation work. And as I say, those pretty much will go together really nicely. You might find one or two examples of exercises that don't go together well. So something like an overhead press and a barbell curl. Lots of axial loading with the overhead press. If we're doing heavy barbell curls, that could be an issue. But for the most part, any of those exercises will pair up nicely together. Okay, what about lower body exercises? So we've seen how upper body exercises can pair up nicely together. Lower body exercises, in my opinion, don't pair up so well together. Some coaches do pair them up. Personally, I'm not a fan. And that's because just the anatomy of the lower body is quite different than the anatomy of the upper body. So when we're doing our pushing and pulling exercises, when we're doing our pressing exercises, our upper back muscles are not engaged. They're relaxing to allow a smooth movement from the pressing muscles. With our lower body muscles, that's just not the case. So even if we divide exercises up into sort of knee dominant exercises, so our squats, our lunges, our split squats, our leg press, and our hip dominant exercises, working more of the glutes and hamstrings, so our deadlifts, our Romanian deadlifts, kettlebell swings. Even if we group those into two different categories, we can't pair them together that well, because most of the time with our lower body exercises, we're moving through the hip and the knee at the same time. So we're working the quads and the glutes together, which just means that we're going to break that golden rule of one exercise is going to have a negative impact. Because even if we take our most extreme examples, so if, a front squat, for example, as a knee dominant exercise, that would work the quadricep muscles a lot, but we're still going to work the glutes and the hamstrings. There might be one or two examples of exercises that work okay. If we think about something like a leg extension, like the leg extension machine, where we're just extending the knee, working the quads, we could potentially pair that one up with a hamstring curl for the hamstrings, but there's not too many of those examples around, and for the most part, they don't really work. A quick note on potentiation pairings. So that would be a different kind of topic. That's where we would pair up a heavy strength movement with an explosive movement. So something like a heavy squat and a jump would be a classic kind of potentiation pairing. Those do actually work really well together, but that's not really what we're talking about today. We're talking about pairing up two strength exercises together. Okay, so what about upper body and lower body? What about pairing those exercises? Well, that actually can work very well together, but we have to be a little bit careful about which exercises we put together. So we can see here we've got these blue exercises, so our knee dominant lower body exercises. So again, we're thinking about our squats, front squats, back squats, split squats. These type of exercises, they pair very nicely with upper body vertical pulling exercises because they tend to complement each other quite well, because these knee dominant lower body exercises, they tend to load the spine, they tend to put a lot of compressive force on the spine, whereas our upper body vertical pulling exercises, they tend to do the opposite. They unload the spine. So if we think about a set of pull-ups or chin-ups, the weight of the legs is actually actively decompressing the spine. So one compresses, one decompresses. Knee dominant exercises tend to be not grip intensive, because a lot of them involve supporting bars on the back, on the shoulders, and not involving heavy grip work, whereas upper body vertical pulling exercises tend to be very grip intensive. So you can see how those exercises match up quite well together. We've got a quick note on upper body horizontal pulling exercises. So they don't necessarily pair so well with our knee dominant exercises because they fatigue the stabilizing muscles, and specifically that the upper and lower back tend to be fatigued by horizontal pulling exercises. There may be some that can work, but for the most part, they don't work that well. Okay, so the other groups of exercises that pair up quite nicely together are hip dominant lower body exercises. So that would be our deadlift group essentially, or hip dominant hinging exercises, and they pair up quite nicely with our upper body horizontal pushing exercises. Okay, now hip dominant exercises, they can be quite hard to pair because they load the spine. There's a big axial load, and they're often very grip intensive, so they're quite hard to pair, but they pair up quite nicely with our horizontal pushing exercises, because with those exercises we don't have that same axial vertical loading of the spine, and they're not grip intensive, because although we're holding weights, the weight is pushing into the hand rather than the heavy grip work. But on the same note, they pair up well with the horizontal pushing exercises, but not so well with the vertical pushing exercises, because when we're pressing vertically, we're reintroducing that vertical axial loading of the spine. So as we've spoken about before, they don't go well together. Okay, right. So if we just stuck to those guidelines of pairing up the upper and lower upper body pushing exercises and upper body pulling exercises, and these guidelines of pairing knee dominant vertical pull, hip dominant and horizontal pushing exercises, you would do pretty well. Okay, so you don't need to go that much further than that, but we have broken it down a bit further because there are some other options. So if we're just talking about knee dominant lower body exercises, so talking about things like back squats, front squats, split squats, step ups, single leg squats, we've spoken about how they pair very nicely with upper body pulling exercises, upper body vertical pulling exercises, but they do also pair pretty well with upper body horizontal pushing exercises, so our kind of bench press variations. And they can actually at times work better, especially if we're using dumbbells. So most of our lower body knee dominant exercises we've spoken about are not grip intensive because we're using bars, but if we're using dumbbells and holding heavy weights in the hands or in goblet positions, then we're potentially better off pairing them with our horizontal pushing exercises because we wouldn't want to match up to grip intensive exercises. Okay? Right, what about our lower body hip dominant exercises? Well, we've kind of broken these up into two groups. So the hip dominant exercises with heavy axial loads, heavy vertical compressive forces on the spine. So that would be our deadlifts, Romanian deadlifts, single leg deadlifts, kettlebell swings. And we spoke about how they match up, they pair up quite nicely with our upper body horizontal pushing exercises. But there are a group of hip dominant exercises where we don't have that same axial load, okay? So things like hip thrusts, glute ham raise, back extensions, leg curls, we don't have any compressive axial load with those, and they're not very grip intensive either. So they are much easier exercises to pair. So we can also pair those with the horizontal pushing exercises, with our bench press variations, but because we don't have the vertical loading, they tend to work well with upper body pushing exercises. Okay, so now we've got some more options, so we can pair them with overhead presses and shoulder presses. And they also, because they're not grip intensive, they can also pair up with upper body vertical pulling exercises. So our pull-ups, our chin-ups, our lat pull-downs. So they are much easier to pair. Okay, so we've got a few more options. They can sometimes work well with horizontal pulling exercises, but again, we can have this issue of tiring out the stabilizing muscles. So some horizontal pulling exercises they'll work with, but not all. Okay, so closing thoughts. So this is a sort of a general guide that works generally well for most groups of exercises, but there are some exceptions. So things like machine exercises, so resistance machines, they tend to do a lot of the stabilizing for you. So they're a bit more forgiving in terms of pairing exercises together because we don't have such an issue of fatiguing the stabilizing muscles. Body weight exercises, because we're not dealing with external loads so much. They're a bit easier to pair up. And we've spoken about how some of the horizontal pulls can be quite tricky to pair up, but the chest supported variations where our chest is lying prone on a bench, they're a bit easier to pair up because they don't have the issue of the lower back muscles fatiguing. Core exercises. So I didn't talk about core exercises in this coach's corner because I just wanted to try and keep it as brief as possible. But core exercises can work quite well with pairing up exercises as well, because they tend to be sort of lower level and not dealing with big external loads. And then the next note is, to pair or not to pair big exercises. So supersetting is great and it does make your workout more time efficient, but sometimes you might not want to pair up exercises. So you're talking about, big heavy squats, big heavy deadlifts. They're very fatiguing, and sometimes you are just better off just resting with those exercises, or pairing them up with something really low level, like a mobilization or a rehab or prehab exercise, just something really low level that's going to allow you to focus on the big exercises and moving as much weight as possible with those. And the final thought is essentially don't forget to rest. So although we're pairing these exercises up, it doesn't mean that you have to move straight from one exercise right to another. What it means is if you do, let's take our bench press and pull up option that we were talking about. It might mean that you do a set of bench presses and then you rest for 30 to 60 seconds and then do your set of pull-ups, okay? Then rest for a minute or two and then go back to the bench press. So it still allows us to get a lot more work in than if we just did the set of bench press and then rested for 3 minutes. But it all goes back to that first golden rule. Each exercise must not have a negative impact on the other exercise. Okay, thanks for staying with us, guys. I know it's a bit of a long one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.